So, good afternoon. Man, I want to invite you all up on the stage, and we just have a roundtable conversation, right? All right. That's all good. Hey, so my name is Kevin Clayton, and I have the absolute privilege to be the Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And you may think like, well, why is there a connection here between, what sports? We're talking about home ownership or what have you. We actually believe that there's a direct correlation between kind of what sports is as a conduit to financial and economic strength, economic empowerment, or what have you. And we're going to talk slightly about that, but we have some experts that are going to really share some of their backgrounds and specific programs to become homeowners. And Laura, when I'm thinking about just a few people in the crowd, if these few people become homeowners, isn't it worth the time for us to have this conversation?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do some intros. So I actually want to start right here to my left, Tanya Manise, and Tanya, CEO, President of Cleveland Neighborhood Project. Progress,
sorry. Yep.
Thank you for apologizing on my behalf. Okay, I appreciate that. Yep. No, but it's all good, right? All right, and Laura Granderman, and Laura's Vice President of Rocket Community Fund, correct? All right, and we also have Jamar Doyle, and Jamar is Greater Collinwood Development Corporation, okay? And my friend, okay? Wally Colson, founder, CEO of Mokify.
That's me. Yes, sir.
Okay, did I get that right?
You got it 100%.
Okay, because if not...
The most important part you got right was, I'm your friend.
Oh, I wasn't clear. Were you talking to Wally or were you talking to Jamar?
Wow.
Which one's your friend?
So, these are all my friends that are joining us for a conversation. And really on separate occasions, I've been a part of conversations that the four of our panelists have had. And there's some really amazing things going on from a home ownership standpoint. So I want to just begin to actually talk about, there's kind of three areas I want to focus on. One of which is to put the elephant that's in the room on the table, that there are some very specific challenges in becoming a homeowner to begin with. But then when you overlay the environment for people of color and some of the situations that involve with kind of barriers for people of color to become homeowners, would like to, if it's okay, we explore that a little bit from your perspectives, because you all four have a different perspective. So, Tanya, if we can start with you, sure. Just kind of offer a perspective from your seat.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that opportunity. And Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, we are focused on the equitable revitalization of neighborhoods, and we do that through partners throughout the community development system. Jamar is one of those. And it's really focused on the fact that our neighborhoods have really seen disinvestment over the years. If you look at the 1940s redlining maps all over the country, you look at those redlining maps today, and unfortunately, you're seeing about the same pattern, both from a lending perspective, health outcomes, educational outcomes, wealth outcomes. It is stark, and it's really something we need to get past. And we know that people really build wealth through starting a small business and through home ownership, both of which really require a functioning financial market. And we still don't really have that in many neighborhoods throughout the country, and clearly in our East Side neighborhoods in Cleveland.
Okay, so thank you. And also appreciate you kind of giving a little bit background around what it is your organization does. So Laura, your perspective, and also just talk a little bit about, the Rocket Community Fund.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I'm really grateful to be here today. These folks are all friends, as you mentioned earlier, and it's just an honor to be part of this conversation, which is so important. And I think, Tanya, you just talked a little bit about the importance of being a homeowner. And the importance is, for generations, we have built wealth through home ownership. We've built stability through home ownership, and that stability bleeds into every other part of our lives. Our educational stability, our employment, our ability to have a solid community social structure, right? It all comes from sort of this base of housing stability and in particular home ownership. So the Rocket Community Fund is the philanthropic arm of Rocket Mortgage and Rocket Companies. And so much of what we've built our company on is the importance of that value of homeownership. So a lot of our community work, our philanthropic work, is focused on helping people to be able to create a pathway for themselves through either to housing stability or to homeownership directly. And today I have a lovely friend in the crowd here, Trina Scott, who will also is a great partner in crime and knows this work very well. Today, we see about a 30-point gap in Black homeownership and white homeownership. And that is incredibly stark and incredibly challenging, knowing that we've put so many different programs in place as a country to try to bridge that gap for such a long period of time. And there's still these persistent barriers. And I think today, to be able to explore some of those barriers, the way that we measure credit and the way that we allow people to take debt on is something that's really important. The way that we educate our communities and our children about financial literacy and the importance of homeownership is something that we should talk about. And even things as small as, can you become a homeowner if I don't have 20% down payment? If I'm not ready to pay out for a 20% down payment, am I still able to become a homeowner? The answer is yes, absolutely. There are so many tools out there, but it's just, building trust around those tools and starting to bridge that gap through conversation, through solid action, and through some policy change as well. And I know, Wole in particular is going to talk about some tools that we can tangibly bring to the table.
Okay. Thank you. So Jamar, from the Collinwood neighborhoods that you serve, just tell us a little bit about your organization, and then also from your seat, what are you seeing kind of the gap from a racial standpoint? What's your perspective on that?
Sure, and again, I also, first, I'm just honored to sit up here with this panel. Everyone is friends, but I also highly respect and value the knowledge and expertise that's up here. So it's great to be able to sit up here. But the Greater Collinwood Development Corporation, we are the community development corporation for the Greater Collinwood communities, which is North Shore Collinwood, Collinwood Village, Nottingham Village, Euclid Green, Forest Hill. So it's a big area, sort of that, if you can picture a map of Cleveland, it's that northeast corner that kind of sticks out next to the lake. Everything from Eddy Road to the border with Euclid, everything from the lakefront south to the borders with East Cleveland and South Euclid. So it's kind of the context, and it's broad, it's big, it covers a lot of different housing styles and markets. And to your question, what I really think is the impact, particularly in Collinwood, but you see it repeated throughout the city of Cleveland, is really sort of the impact of history, right? So we talked about, and Tanya talked about redlining. Even though that is illegal today, we are dealing with the scars of redlining still within our communities some 40, 50, 60 years later, right? So when we think about lending, it is difficult in parts of Collinwood to get banks to lend. Part of which is because the community has been disinvested, so now it's devalued. So now the price points of some of the houses, which we'd love to get people into, rehab them, get them back to productive use, but because they're valued at 30, 40, 50,000, it's difficult to get banks to lend at that amount. So again, to your point, Laura, talking about tools and resources and how do we change policy, how do we change our banking, so that again, rather than having these houses sit vacant or continue to deteriorate, these are good houses, good bones, and if we can get people in them, again, with the right lending tools, as well as with buyer education, homeownership education, we can start to rebuild our communities. But again, it's difficult when those communities have been devalued for so long, and people just, from banks to, businesses, just don't see them worth investing in, and so that becomes difficult. But we're working to overcome those challenges, and I'm beginning to see a difference in the city of Cleveland.
Thank you, Jamar. So Wally, the first time that I ever heard you talk about Mokify, I was fascinated because, it was so innovative and the approach was just so right on. Talk a little bit about, Mokify and kind of what your company does, but also kind of chime in on the conversation about the gap from a racial standpoint.
100%. So, again, privileged to be on the dais with all of you. So Mokify was an idea that came about a couple years ago after the death of Michael Brand. And I had that was my George Floyd moment. We wanted to figure out how can we use the financial institutions and financial services as a way to move communities forward. And looking at the riots and the protests that were happening after the death of Michael Brown, I was reminded of the documentary Eyes on the Prize, and watching those images in 2014, very similar to the images of 1968, and I thought, we have made no progress as a black community in the intervening almost 50 years. So I left my job at JP Morgan. I was one of the most senior people there, to try to figure out how to use my time and talents to close the racial wealth gap. And with that, we sort of figured out, how do we think about bringing people into the banking system in a safe and sustainable way? So we've built a company focused on just doing that. And at a high level, what we do is, our idea is, first you got to get people banked. And places like Detroit and Cleveland, 1 out of 5 people don't have a bank account, right? So you can't even have a conversation about homeownership if you don't have a bank account. So we focus on that, and then we take things like rent payments and report those to the credit bureaus. And as Tanya described, we have made no progress as a country since they put together the Fair Housing Act in 1968 in terms of the disparity of the homeownership gap. And the reality is, people who pay their rent on time, and that should be a part of their credit score. So we've changed the game on that. And then with that, we've said, okay, if you got your banking right, and if you got your credit right, then you might be in a position to get a home responsibly. And home ownership, and we're so excited about partnering with everyone on the table on the dais here, because there are, to your point, terrific homes for people. You've got to make sure that people are ready. And so our innovation now is saying, okay, we want to create a blueprint for everybody to figure out how they can position themselves for home ownership. And the blueprint, we call it the Mokify Blueprint, really allows individuals to bring all their banking information, either with us or somebody else, and they can download an app, bring that banking information into their own personal blueprint. It'll allow them to create a budget. It'll allow them to see what their personal balance sheet is, look at their credit score, start to figure out how they can improve their credit score. And then this is the part that we're so excited about, they can make that information available to a financial coach. And that really bridges the gap for the individual to work with a trusted person. And then once they work with that trusted person, we can then say, okay, you've got your credit right. We know what your availability is in terms of down payment. If you don't have the 20%, which you don't need 20% to buy a home, they're wonderful federal, state, and local programs. Once you have the requisite down payment, we can then bring that to a lender who can say, okay, this person is ready for a mortgage. Black people are turned down at a rate of 3 times that of their white counterparts for mortgages. Why is that? 3 reasons. Asset values, to your point. The second reason is credit scores aren't high enough. And the third is they don't have a down payment. We're trying to lean in on the last 2 of those issues to really move the community forward.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift a little bit from what was sent to you all from a question standpoint, because the conversation we're having right now is actually personalizing my own situation, and I want to use that as a kind of common denominator. So I grew up here in Cleveland, and we lived on the east side of Cleveland. We had a chance to then move into Shaker, which some people think that's like the greatest place in the world. However, for black folks in Cleveland that moved into Shaker, particularly the time that I came up, we were right on the border of Shaker and Cleveland where we were allowed to be, and we lived in a 2-family home. So my mother at that point, I remember for 5 straight summers, we moved because the rent went up $10. And we moved. We moved to another 2-family home. One time we moved 3 houses down. So here's my point. I grew up thinking that was a norm, which is unlike a lot of people that think renting is a norm, particularly for people of color. And then it wasn't until I actually saw other people in my professional life that actually own homes. I'm talking about I'm 25 years old now, and I'm saying, wait a minute, but they didn't look like me either. So here's my question, because I don't think my story is any different than what today we're facing with people not understanding the process and some of the myths. So I'd just like to ask each one of you your perception of, one, the realities that are out there, and then two, I want to talk about some of the myths and misconceptions. I grew up thinking renting was the only way that I could ever really, that was the road for me. So maybe we could start, okay?
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear your story, because I moved here from India into a rental house in Shaker Heights, but within a year, my parents bought. And I think a lot of that was they had a lot of guidance, right? They had a lot of support. They had people explaining to them what to do, because in India, nobody owns much of anything, right? So it wasn't like they knew anything coming from from their home. And I think that's what's missing, right, is a lot of that guidance, a lot of that support, that understanding of what you can do. And listen, I want to say there's nothing wrong with renting, right? There are a lot of reasons why, especially in these markets, and if you're going to be moving, if you're not quite ready for the responsibility of all of the things that come along, especially with older homes in Cleveland and in Detroit, where you have to, replace boilers and old homes. But not understanding, I think, is the biggest issue, and not being empowered with choice is a really significant issue. And what you see in Cleveland consistently now, and we're really trying to change this, is people are paying more in rent than they would in a mortgage if they own their home. And often they're paying rent in a home that is not safe, that is not lead-free. Obviously safe and lead-free is redundant, but really not in a home that's really providing stability. And then the last thing I really wanted to comment on what you were saying is the idea of having to move constantly, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's really disruptive to a family. There's a significant cost in having to move all the time. And that sense of, if you are a renter, what's your bill of rights? What is the requirement as that rent goes up for a landlord to provide some amount of continuity? And there's really no safety net right now there in the way homeownership would provide.
Mm-hmm. Let me go to Jamar, and then I want to go to Laura. Jamar, was my story unlike many that you are faced with or that you hear?
No, it's very similar to lots of friends that I grew up with, including my partner, and I see that a lot in Collinwood. And I like that you actually mentioned being in a two-family home, because there's this double. The Cleveland double is a famous sort of thing, and if you're not from Cleveland, if you're in our neighborhood, you'll see upstairs and downstairs, and there's a double porch. And right now, they're sort of vilified, I think, because Cleveland once had over 900,000 people. Today, we're down to about 370,000 people, so we've lost about 2/3 of our population. That density, in part, was because of these doubles, right? And so everyone's saying we've got to, in some ways, de-densify. But when I think about homeownership, and a lot of them, because of that, have become rentals, when you look at what it costs to, again, purchase one of these homes, because my first home was a double. And so I'm on this now personal crusade to save the double, because I think it is a cost-effective way to get into homeownership. I lived upstairs. There were 2 units downstairs. Their rent paid the mortgage, paid the utilities. I lived rent-free and built equity, which then allowed me to step into my next house. But I think people don't think of it that way, right? And it becomes daunting. Now, again, to Tanya's point, there's some home education that has to go into that, first into owning a home, but then also being a landlord, right? So that's not potentially the first step for everyone. But it is important to think through what are the ways in which we can get innovative to help people step into homeownership, educate them about homeownership, the benefits of it, and then to your point, get them ready, right? So from a credit situation, from a banking situation, from a savings situation, but it's the totality of it, because if we're going to save our neighborhoods, we want to encourage wealth generation in our communities, because as people generate wealth, then they're spending more within our shops, within our restaurants, and they're invested within our community, right? So there's so many benefits, and it addresses the issue of constantly moving and having the instability that goes along with that. So, I'm passionate about sort of being able to find ways in which we can do that, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because it just was important for me to find a way to do that responsibly, because I did not have a lot of money starting out. And that worked for me.
So Jamar, I appreciate you talking about the double. At a very young age, I was pretty resourceful. I figured out a way to make a triple. You know the attic?
I was about to say the attic, right?
There's a lot of space in the attic. Drop
Absolutely.
downstairs.
Absolutely. And I mean, it really is. And I think finding those innovative ways like that can help people get that taste of home ownership, because there's something, once it's yours and you're able to, pick the paint color without asking someone. Or, as my partner said, and he was someone who moved around a lot, and that was traumatic. So he's extremely, he's reached a point where he can purchase a home, and it's part of it is having a place that you can lay your head and know that no one can put you out. And I think that peace of mind, and recognizing that there's a lot of people, and most of them are people of color, that don't look like us, but not entirely, right? But what is the psychological impact of not having a place that you feel secure in, and that this is mine and no one can put me out? Because that's happened to my family and then friends as well, where, for whatever reason, the landlord comes along and says, we need you to move, and you've got 30 days. Can you imagine not expecting that, and you now have to pick up your life and find a new place in 30 days? You also have kids. There's a trauma that goes with that. So I think we have to think about, what that means for our families too.
So Laura, we'd like for you to weigh in, and you have a unique perspective because you're on the kind of mortgage side, and it's getting people into home ownership from renting. So kind of maybe add on to this conversation, please.
Well, I think you guys both brought up some really important points, and the thing that I would come back to as well is a lot of people, everyone has their own situation. Everyone has a slightly unique perspective. Everyone's got a different credit score with a different debt to income ratio, with a different background and different set of traumas and sort of perspectives that we're bringing to the table through this process. And one thing that I think is really important is, first of all, sharing your story. So I really appreciate that you shared your story, because that's how we break down some of those barriers, is to say, you know what, I did this and you can do it too. So sharing your story. And then the second thing is, we were talking backstage about hope. We were talking about hope, and it seems like such a sort of ubiquitous thing that you should just take for granted, but it's not. So many people have gone through this process, have felt traumatized by it, have gotten a declination, or assumed that renter life was the only life for them. But to have hope and sort of faith that even if you're getting a decline for some reason, there are resources like the folks that you're seeing up on this panel here, and that so many people want you to be successful in this process. And I think that was something that actually it took me a little while to find out, because it can be such a daunting process. So just even from the mortgage perspective, trying to put together some of the puzzle pieces to help clients really be able to navigate this journey is very difficult. And so we're just collectively trying to make that a little easier, so that the hope can be a little brighter and that people can kind of take those steps. But share your story, and know that there are resources out there that will be able to take you to the next step, be able to improve your credit score or change your debt to income ratio. It may take some time, it may take some persistence, but that it is very possible, and that there's so many people out there rooting for you.
Okay. So thank you, Laura. So while I will ask you to join in on this, but also can you take us to another level around some of the misperceptions that are blocking us from really the opportunities that all of you have talked about, because that misperception, or myths, if you will, are keeping a lot of people from even considering home ownership. And I'm going to ask each one of you to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of misperceptions, particularly around the fact that home ownership isn't for me. As we just talked about, we haven't seen that over multiple generations, first time experiencing this. And the home ownership process can be a daunting process. I mean, you've got to really expose yourself to someone you don't know. So many of us don't have relationships with banks or financial institutions who are lenders, and it can just be overwhelming in terms of providing access to your income, providing access to your taxes. And oh, by the way, so many of us are, particularly in this gig economy, operate outside of the traditional financial framework that is easy for us others to identify and understand. So I think part of the myth is, well, I don't fit the box, so I can't get a mortgage. And so I think part of that is it's important to have organizations like the ones you have on the dais here and others who are willing to say, no, it's okay. We can take where you are in terms of where your credit score is, lack of access to a down payment. Maybe you operate in cash. But that, just because you operate in cash, if you can demonstrate that you've paid your rent on a regular basis, and oh, by the way, the rent is actually less than what the mortgage payment would be, you actually are qualified to get a mortgage. And someone shared with me the other day this concept of the idea is, I'll get it wrong, but the concept is, it's a must for you to get a mortgage. It's not a question of whether you should be a homeowner. It's like, how can you become a homeowner and how quickly can you do it? And I think that needs to be the mentality, particularly in the Black community, that sort of says, hey, we have every right to be homeowners just like everybody else. I can't believe in my heart that Black people are 30% less eligible for homeowners than their white counterparts. Doesn't make sense to me. And the average credit score for a white person, for a Black person, 25% of Black people have a credit score greater than 700. Their white counterpart, that number is like 50%, right? And so I can't believe that. And so these misconceptions based on structural issues have marginalized people. I just want to jump in on, it's a little bit like jump rope. I just want to jump in on the conversation here around homeownership. So my dad grew up on 144th and Kinsman, and his father and my grandmother, they were blue-collar workers, worked in the factories, and they were able to own their home in East Cleveland in the, this was 50s, 40s, 50s, and all the way into today. And that neighborhood really was a rock in the community. And now that I'm thinking about it, they had people living in the attic. They had people living on the second floor. And that was sort of, there was no question in terms of the stability that provided. My mom, she ended up marrying my dad. They moved back to Cleveland after college. And it was my great-grandfather that gave her the down payment so they could buy a house in Shaker on Landsmere Road, which was the beginning of sort of the homeownership. So growing up as a kid, it was like, it wasn't whether you're going to own a home, it was actually, can you stretch to figure out how to buy more home than you can afford, to figure out how to get into the homeownership game. So that story is unique, and I recognize it's not everybody's story, but the point of that is we just need to make it not, hey, is it right for me kind of thing. We should just talk to everybody and say, hey, you should buy a home. Maybe not now, but let's figure out the game plan that you can do it responsibly at some point in your lifetime. And that should be the gift we give to all kids, Black, white, whatever, because that's going to be what transforms lives. Last thing I'll say, 70% of Black children today who are in the middle class will fall out of the middle class as adults. And if you're going to change the game on that statistic, home ownership is the critical way to do that. So I actually think it's an ultimate imperative that we accelerate this conversation. Otherwise, we're going to have negative net worth in the Black community in the next 30 years.
And I want to jump in on that because there's so many things you said that really struck me. Because what you have is that general, we talked a little bit about trust, right? And there is an inherent distrust from the African American community and the banking sector. And it's something we really have to overcome if we're going to change this, because to your point, people don't see themselves as prospective homeowners. And what we saw is between 2008, when the foreclosure crisis hit, and today, you saw what our, I'm thinking about people who are now probably in their 30s. They watched their grandparents and their parents lose their homes or lose all the wealth that was in their homes. And so I'm going to make it really, specific. The Buckeye neighborhood in Cleveland, right? The median home value in 2006 was $80,000, which was about the median home value throughout Cleveland's neighborhoods. It dropped to $23,000 after the foreclosure crisis. While most of the rest of Cleveland has recovered, Buckeye's home value is now about $35,000. So if you were somebody who was retired and all of your wealth was in that home, you lost it all. And so you've got a generation of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s who don't trust the housing market, who don't believe in what you're absolutely right? Your story is generational wealth. You build generational wealth in the way that you just talked about. The first house I bought, my parents helped me with a portion of the down payment, right? We had 5%, they helped with another 5%. I've long since paid them back, but I couldn't have started with that, right? But there has to be that intention and that ability to pass it down, right? Doesn't exist for the most part in the African American community, or where it does, people are like, whoa, I don't want to put my wealth there. And that idea of having that ability on the rainy day, right, dropping out of the middle class, is about having some savings and that ability when things go wrong to have a nest egg, and that's so often your home. And so we have to kind of rebuild trust in the housing market and the minority communities as a whole.
Thank you. So when I think about the conversation, we actually are building, if you will, a home from a conversation standpoint. Kind of started with what kind of the climate is, what the environment is. We then started talking about the misconceptions. We talked about just kind of what the whole renting versus owning. And I'm sure the folks that are here would like to know a couple things. And I know each one of you have strategies, programs of help. So let's start from a strategy standpoint. And I love the word building wealth. So let's talk about building wealth, and then we'll come back and then talk about programs that you all have. So who would like to start that discussion about building wealth?
Talking too much.
Okay, Jamar, why don't we start it?
Sure. So I think from a building wealth standpoint, one of the things that isn't sometimes known is that Cleveland actually does have a lot of programs designed around helping people get into homeownership. But perhaps there's not as much intentionality around getting the word out about those programs. And just recently, and Tanya, help me if I'm saying the wrong organization, I believe Cleveland Housing Network has a new product that specifically is aimed at houses that are at that lower threshold in some of our neighborhoods, acknowledging, again, that Buckeye is a great neighborhood to live in. The home values may not be there where a traditional lender may be is interested in lending, right? But how do we figure our way around that? So there are products out there that are like that help to build wealth. And I think that that's important because the other thing is, and we've talked about the importance of home ownership, is how many businesses have been started by taking out perhaps a home equity loan, right? Or acknowledging that, okay, because I own this property, I now have an asset that I can leverage to start a business, and then as that business starts to succeed, again, that's a new business in our neighborhood, within our community that begins to grow. And to Tanya's point earlier, two of the most common ways to build wealth are either through home ownership itself and then also through starting a business. And I think the two go hand in hand, right? So it's acknowledging that. And I think also acknowledging, to Tanya's point, I love, and you said it as well, the trust factor, because there's been acknowledging the fact that in some ways the financial community has not been a good steward to everyone. And so how do we begin to rebuild that trust? And I think, through, Mokify, for instance, if it's building a trusting relationship with someone who is in the financial sector. So, because again, and not just, traditional banks, but we're also talking about folks that maybe have been taken advantage of by predatory lenders and by payday loan places. And so, again, there's a lot of reasons that people may have mistrust. And again, those types of institutions, a lot of times, are the ones that are representing financial products within, communities that have been neglected and are under-resourced, right? So sometimes that may be the only experience that people have with the financial sector is through a payday lender. And so, again, it starts to build that mistrust. So building that relationship that can help say, here's where you are, let's work on your credit, let's get you some education, and then let's build towards home ownership, I think really stabilizes our communities.
Laura, please.
Well, I would just build on that to say, I think that's what's so powerful about what Mokify is building is that it sort of meets you where you're at. It's not saying like this is the path that you have to take, right? There's no one path for any one person. I think Tanya mentioned it earlier. There's different ways to build wealth. There's homeownership, there's owning a business, and there's owning ideas and being able to sort of hustle in that sense as well, right? We love the idea of hustling in Detroit, which I think is probably something that Cleveland can relate to as well. So, but that's a whole nother thing, right? You kind of have to hustle because you have to be able to navigate through all of these different resources and pathways and opportunities. And to a certain extent, that sucks. That sucks that you should have to do that. And so what I love about Mokify is that it is building a platform that allows you to come in with your own unique self. It meets you where you're at, and it says, let's build a path together, you know? And I think that's what so many good partners can do, but it really does require people sort of reaching out for that assistance. It's not a knock against you to be reaching out for assistance. A lot of times these are programs that are specifically meant for people to help you through whatever challenge you're in or whatever situation you're in, or just give you a little boost. It is not a dig against you or a knock against you. In fact, in the city of Detroit, we have a program that reaches out door to door to help people learn more about property tax foreclosure. Some folks are in chronic tax delinquency or foreclosure, and we started reaching out to everyone who is behind on their property taxes by any amount of time. What we found was that 90% of the people that we were talking to who owned their homes, who were at risk of losing their homes, should have actually been able to qualify for a tax exemption that would have completely helped them avoid that risk, right? But because they either didn't know about it or saw it and thought, that's not for me, or saw it and thought, you know, if I can't pay my taxes, that must be a personal sort of a personal, like something I'm lacking in, right? That must say something bad about me. That it's there to help you. There's so many of these programs that are there to help you, and it ends up hurting folks to not do that type of outreach. But it does have also a stigma associated with it. So again, just what I love about everyone on this panel is that people really meet you where you're at, but it's okay to take that step out and ask for that support and help.
I was going to say one more thing about CHN Housing Capital and the idea of low-value mortgages. So what you're seeing in so much of Cleveland, again, it's affordability, right? The flip side, the positive side is that we've got homes that people could afford to buy, but we haven't had a mortgage product, so it's really exciting to see this mortgage product that's around $50,000. The other thing that you're seeing in many of our neighborhoods are most of our homes need significant upgrading, right? They need to be rehabbed, and so there are very few acquisition rehab programs out there. It's a difficult product from a lending perspective, but a real opportunity we're seeing right now that Cleveland and many other cities are going to utilize their American Rescue Plan funds to help build the gap so that banks can start to lend in that way is by doing maybe the first 4 or 5 acquisition rehabs in a neighborhood. Collinwood's a great opportunity there where it's more of a middle neighborhood, right? It's not struggling as much, and it has a very strong middle-class feeling, good housing stock. If we do the first 4 or 5 acquisition rehabs on a street, now the appraisal values are such that a bank can lend, and it doesn't take a massive amount of intervention. And there are definitely people who would want to be moving into an older home in a great community, but it seems so complicated. And so if we can help bridge that gap, and I think that is absolutely what government and the nonprofit sector are meant to do, is bridge the gap so that the private market can function. And we're just kind of, it's the middle neighborhood strategy in Cleveland, but we're learning from other communities like Baltimore that have seen real success there in our neighborhoods.
And I just want to chime in and say, we're beginning to do similar to what Laura mentioned in Detroit, going door to door to let people know about these programs. Part of what we have through Neighbor to Neighbor, and thank you to Rocket Community Fund and Neighborhood Progress for supporting us in that. There are several neighborhoods in addition to Collinwood that are piloting this program. So recognizing that we need to get the word out about housing programs, other programs within the city of Cleveland that people may not know about, and just hitting the pavement, going door to door. So I appreciate it. Just wanted to say we're starting that, and we appreciate importing that idea from Detroit and having the funding to do so.
We appreciate having strong partners that we can export that idea to.
Aren't we just all
It's
friends?
just a love fest going on here for sure. But it's important, right? And I think to the extent that you have a national emergency in my mind, quite frankly, around how do we make sure that the economic justice plan in the Black community is as robust as a social justice plan. And it's going to require new ways of thinking, new types of partnerships in order to close the racial wealth gap. Because this didn't happen, and I'm a bit of a history buff, this has been around for over 160 years, right? And we got to this point because after the death of Abraham Lincoln, when they were about to make the decision to provide the proverbial 40 acres, it wasn't even proverbial, it was literally 40 acres and a mule, because we had a lot of land to free Black people, and President Johnson just, did an about face, and that went away. That was the beginning of the end, because you think about how other folks in this country were able to become a landed class. They were giving out land like it was tic tacs, and Black people did not get that. And so, and the other interesting statistic is, if you look at the amount of wealth in the Black community at the time that the slaves were freed, it was around 2%. And that was, and it's a crude analysis, but that analysis based on looking at the value of Black people as property and putting that into the context of wealth. If you look at what in 2016, I think this analysis was done, Black people have the same amount of wealth in 2016 as they did at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. So we have a fundamental problem in this country that we have to address, but it's going to take a lot of different strategies, but at a minimum, and I love the idea of government and the philanthropic sector working together to solve a market failure, but I also think that you need commercial enterprises like Mokify and others to partner with government and not-for-profit and Rocket and others to be able to create a whole new paradigm, because we can't have another 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the same situation, because it's going to be bleaker than it is today if we don't figure this out.
Thank you all for that. Why don't we offer any of our participants who have attended a chance to ask any questions they may have? As each one of you like, whoa, don't look at me, right? All right. Yes, and we actually have a mic over here. Okay.
We can hear, yes, ma'am.
I'm really glad I came to this. So I followed the category of somebody in her early 30s. And so it's interesting because a lot of stories were shared about, a lot of, Kevin's story about, I just saw, I used to be rescued. Like that's how I knew being in a home. And so for me, what's interesting is I grew up, besides 1 year of my childhood, which was only because we moved from one city to another, not connected with the year, to find a home. I
So perhaps I'm even summarizing that, it's like, how do you even start?
Yeah.
Like,
I was going to mention something is that you're seeing more and more, and CHN Housing Partners does this as well, and we're seeing, financial counseling that's independent of housing initially, right? It's just helping you plan. And so that idea, student debt, we consistently hear is one of the main barriers to home ownership, right? And so thinking about, okay, so at what point are you saving? At what point maybe does it make sense to buy a home? Okay, you don't want to now, but you might want to in 5 or 6 years. And by the way, are you also saving for retirement, or do you want to go back to grad school and things like that? And I think a lot of time people think financial counseling is either just associated with buying a home or when you're having problems. And actually, and the other thing is that you hear is like really wealthy people have financial counselors, right? I don't have any wealth. Why would I need a financial counselor? But you actually need one more when you're trying to figure out what the next phase is in your life. So I would really encourage you to do what you're doing and just start planning so you understand your options.
what was interesting about the question is I heard wealth. Actually, I didn't hear the wealth part. I heard about home ownership. And actually, you can begin to build wealth through home ownership and use that as a vehicle, not necessarily an end-all. So any comment to that?
Well, it's just a funny story. So we had brunch with a family friend today, and turns out he ended up he has a home out in California, ended up coming to Cleveland to take care of family, and he's been here for 8 years, had a renter, right? And now he's thinking about leaving and going back home. He's like, well, I don't want to go back to my apartment because I have my home because I've got a renter. That's creating income. I'm going to go find another place. So what ends up happening is it's almost like a ticket into a pathway that can create wealth over time in ways that initially it's a struggle potentially, but but once you're in, you start creating equity, you have optionality, and it is something that I do think maybe we just need to go on a national demystification campaign, because people have more. The two things that are happening. People are probably further along than they realize. To your point, I'm probably paying more in rent than I would as a mortgage. Check, that's true. And second, or probably true. And second, there are so many resources from the federal government to the state to the city to create incentives, whether it's down payment, taxes, corporate initiatives such as the ones happening at Rocket, where people actually have a pathway. And this is the third thing, one of my favorite statistics. In the black community, if you were able to bring people to a level of parity with their white counterparts, that would create $1.5 trillion of value in the GDP of the United States. So to the extent that we are able to solve this problem, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like somebody has to lose if someone moves into a home. In fact, we all win because we have safer communities, we're creating more economic prosperity, and we are a community where everyone has a chance to thrive. And so I think it's one of those unusual opportunities where you get a win-win-win if we're able to solve this problem effectively.
Hey, can I say one thing about the family piece? Is that I think in many ways, a lot of the time if you're single or you have a partner, living in a neighborhood is often such a community building activity, right? My first house was in a small neighborhood in Dallas, and being in a garden, I don't know if you could call what I was doing gardening, but I was really trying hard, and my neighbors were very nice, but that's how I got to know them, right? And it's how I got to know Dallas. I was very homesick, and it was really because I owned a home. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't let even though it sounds like you had really positive associations with family and home, I don't think that exclusively needs to be the case.
Was there a question? Yes, Trina?
This is something that is attainable for them, as opposed to
Well, so I think there's the message and the messenger. I think that's a great question. And the message is the same, right? Just in terms of the resources are there, we've got to demystify it, and I think that's relatively accessible. The part that I think is really the opportunity is the messenger, and that's why I commend, Kevin, what you're doing and what the Cavaliers are doing, and I would challenge the entire NBA, quite frankly, to take a similar view, right? Which is the NBA has a platform which reaches lots of people, and particularly the demographic we're trying to talk to. And when you start having conversations with that platform and others like it, saying homeownership's important, homeownership's accessible, homeowners look like you should be one too, in the same way that the NBA has brought many issues of racial justice to the fore, I think we should lean on the NBA to bring this conversation to the floor, or to the fore, I should say. And what I love about the NBA is it appears that the ownership, the players, the structure is aligned to drive that, and you can reach large numbers of people at a low cost and an efficient way. So it may not be forums like this solely, but I think it's that type of platform because we're in this position. You can't look to the traditional financial services institutions to have that conversation because they're part of the problem. But you need organizations that have the reach and the credibility with the Black community and other communities to go out and say, this is possible, this is important, and here's how you can access it. I think that begins the changing of the narrative and the conversation.
Well, I would also say, I think, so I think we were talking before about this idea of philanthropic, government, private market sort of coming together around a totally new paradigm. That sort of systems change has to happen too, and there's so many of these barriers. I mean, we can talk all day long about resources that do exist, and they do, and you should take advantage of them, and it is possible to take the next steps. And there's also some still real barriers that still need to be addressed, that we do need to, as a collective society, continue to break down those barriers. And that takes policy change, that takes advocacy, that takes real dedication on behalf of basically every partner that touches the system, every stakeholder. And so I would say that has to be really, we have to acknowledge that those barriers do still exist as we continue to have this conversation, and as we continue to get trusted folks out in front of communities to get these resources out there. We also have to be sort of authentic about what problems still exist that need to be broken down.
And I love that you also mentioned TikTok, because I think, yes, we have to, there is a structural issue, as you mentioned, this goes back 160 years, so there's a lot of work that we have to do to address it. But there are a lot of programs, such as Mokify, that's coming out that are helping in these situations. When I heard you say TikTok, I was just wondering, could there be a social media advocacy campaign, 10 to 30 second short bites, because we're in that's the mode that we're in now, right? That's how people communicate. That's just like, you can be a homeowner, here's how, and then click this link. Did you know that there is this, 30% gap between Black homeownership and the rest of our communities? Click this link to find out how we start to close it. Because we're in this cycle where a lot of people aren't going to sit through an hour-long conversation because they're used to TikTok, they're used to Snapchat, they're used to, I'm 43, I probably can't even name them all at this point, right? But, I know that they're out there, and it's just so how do we have a campaign that just gets this information out there in a way that's quickly digested, entices people to want to know more, and then begin to have that relationship that can start to change the dynamic. So I think, to your point, just getting innovative about how we push this information out there.
Okay. So we're nearing the end of our session. There are a couple things, though. Rachel, and you in the back? Yeah. Do we have that bag? Okay. Okay. And do we have somebody to tell us how we're going to do this? You want to tell us? think, Lynn, you should join us. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, audience participation, go ahead.
All right, great. So we have a lovely giveaway. It is a Cavs 4-pack for a family. So we are just going to ask a question, and whoever gets it right gets the opportunity to get the swag, the tickets, and enjoy the Cleveland Cavaliers. They get the bag. They do get the bag. And so we're going to talk about something that happened, some festivities over the weekend. So can anyone say who won the HBCU game yesterday? Which team? It was Howard. And she does get this.
No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't get. She doesn't get it.
No.
She
no.
she can't get it. Yeah, I
Is there
think
another?
we should give it to the
Don't
young lady
worry,
who asked.
we'll bring you to a Cavs
who asked
game
the
too, don't worry
question.
about it.
That's
I know you, and I think you'll get tickets.
And she still
All
gets
right.
it.
You have to come join us and get this.
You have to come get it.
Yeah, that's just another incentive for you guys to come back.
okay. I know, but it's my daughter, Shannon.
We're all family here,
Okay.
friends or family, unclear.
I didn't want to feel.
So, on behalf of the Cavs,
That's my daughter.
why don't you
Yeah,
start filling this out? Why don't you tell us what we got here? Yeah, please, open it.
I get courtside tickets.
That's the wrong letter, my bad. Yes, go ahead and read it.
Okay. Power of Sports Summit. Cavs fan experience package and 4 courtside tickets with access to parking, food, and beverage to the Cavaliers and Minnesota Timberwolves game on February 28th, 2022 at 7 p.m.
Yay! Yay! That's cool.
Well,
You gotta wear
all-star
something to
hat,
the
right?
game, you know?
Yeah.
An all-star notebook. All-star water bottle.
It just keeps going.
And an all-star shirt.
Okay,
Yay!
thank you. What was your name?
Avery Coaxum.
We look forward to you becoming a homeowner very soon, right? Well, you can graduate and all that kind of stuff.
Give her a little shot.
Okay. Couple years? Okay. Can we give her a hand, please? So if I could wrap up, I want to go back to the first statement I said, why there might seem to be, what's the connection between sports, economic empowerment, homeownership? And while you said it, we absolutely believe, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the NBA, that we're really just a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
That we can get in the door. We want to bring our friends with us to try to impact our communities through economic empowerment. Because we know to the extent that you all become homeowners, that is going to help everybody in the community. It also, if we think about being liberated, liberation comes from having economic strength so that we can call our own shots, not necessarily waiting for policy and laws that aren't fair to us to do that. So we feel we have a responsibility to host these kind of forums and bring this to the table. The last thing I will say, although it seemed like it was a joke, this doesn't happen in communities where you have these type of resources, this type of expertise that have become friends. So the friend part was real. It evolved because you have 4 competent people with organizations that are all alike with one mind, one thought, and that is how to bring resources to help our community. So on behalf of the Power of Sports Summit, on behalf of the Cleveland Cavaliers and the NBA and the All-Star Game, thank you for joining us. You all were amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.